Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Chat and Chew. We love to have these conversations. We get to talk to folks in our community that are doing great work, that are doing important work, and we're having important conversations. So I am really excited today because we get to chat with the Roads to Freedom Center for Independent Living. And we're going to be discussing the broken guardianship policy in Pennsylvania. I want to make sure that everybody knows that if you want to turn your captions on your social media platform, there are directions on our website, which is disabilitypridepa.org/turn-on-captions. If you have any questions throughout the event, I will be in the chat and I will be able to answer you back and forth. If you have something that you'd like to ask the panel, I'm going to have those questions there and I will ask Karen and Ron at the end of the conversation. So we are going to get started here. Again, we are talking to the Roads to Freedom CIL. And I put up their website so you can find out more information about them. And then you'll also see at the very bottom is their mission statement. So I am going to kick this off right now. We're going to get online with Karen Koch from the Roads to Freedom Center for Independent Living. Hi, Karen.
Hello, Vicki. Thank you so much for having us join today. It's a topic that is very sad, but it is a topic that needs to be discussed. So I thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with the community. Before I go any further, I will give a description of myself. I am a middle-aged woman with white hair, white skin, seated in my office at Roads to Freedom wearing wire-rimmed glasses. And yes, like you said, Vicki, guardianship. What is guardianship? I think for a lot of people in Pennsylvania, they may never really have heard the word until recently. And there was that Britney Spears person that a few people have heard of. And that really kind of, guardianship, people started talking and thinking, gee whiz, this is really something we need to be aware of. And I heard a couple of people make a comment, well, you only have to worry about a guardianship issue if you have a lot of stuff. You look at Britney Spears, who was, had an estate worth $40 million. And many people felt that that's what the guardianship was truly about, was trying to access and get, her property. I'm here to say in Pennsylvania, this happens not just to celebrities. This happens not just to people with money. This happens to people with very little. And that's what we'd like to talk about a little bit today. First, let's talk about, what is guardianship? Guardianship, it's a legal process, and in which it gives the ability for another entity to take control over a person. Okay, so let's say, Vicki, that I am a person and you are petitioning for guardianship for me. If you are made my guardian, Vicki, you would essentially have all decision-making powers that I would have. You would decide where I live. You could decide who I socialize with. You would decide how my money is spent. You would have total control and total decision-making for anything about me, about my life. Full guardianship, it removes all decision-making authority. I would have no decisions about my health care, money, education, where I live. I would not be able to enter into a simple contract because legally my signature would mean nothing. I would have been declared by a court to be incompetent. And most times a person, once they've been declared incompetent, they are often referred to as the ward. So I would be the ward of the court and you would be the person making my decisions. Now, people may be thinking, well, gee whiz, why would Vicki need to make decisions for Karen? So here's a couple of examples of how guardianship could happen. I'm working with the woman right now at the Center for Independent Living, and her name is Joan. Joan was a person living in the community, going to work every day. Life was good until Joan was a victim of a domestic assault. Joan was beaten so badly during this assault that she was left unconscious and ended up being in a coma for a few months. So Joan, of course, is not able to make decisions for herself if she is in a coma. Obviously the doctor can't ask her for input, how she wants to proceed medically. So in this situation, an emergency guardian was appointed to make decisions on behalf of Joan while she was in a comatose state. What happened, fortunately, is that Joan regained her consciousness, was no longer in a coma, and is now a person with a little bit of a memory deficit. Not much of a memory deficit. She has great long-term memory, but some short-term memory issues have happened. So Joan now has a guardian. Joan is a woman that is 62 years old. And after this attack happened, Joan was put in a nursing facility. The guardian felt that was the best place for Joan. Joan needed to have long-term care and support. Joan was in this nursing care facility and very quickly realized that she did not like being in the facility, that she wanted to be able to live in the community. And Joan felt that even with a disability, she still should have that right to live in the community. So Joan reached out and contacted our agency and asked for Roads to Freedom help to do a nursing home transition, to assist her to get from a nursing home back into the community with the supports that she might need so that she could be successful. Immediately, the first barrier that we encountered was the guardian. The guardian said, absolutely not. Joan can't live out in the community. Joan's not able to, prepare her own meals. Joan doesn't have safety skills. Joan doesn't know how to do laundry. And, we immediately started questioning this. How do you know Joan can't do these things? For one thing, she's in a long-term care facility and she doesn't have an option to prepare her own meals or do her own laundry or really do any activities of daily living. So that's, a really easy example of how the person on the street could suddenly wake up one day and find themselves having a guardian. I didn't switch to decaf, Vicki, so I'm going to take this moment to unplug myself. And we've got another great guest, I believe, who's going to join today, a gentleman named Ron Bassman. And Ron has been working with Roads to Freedom on exactly what we're talking about, this guardianship issue. So I'm curious. I like Ron's take on, why it's important that everybody understand guardianship and how it could impact you.
That's great. Thank you, Ron, for joining us also. I am going to turn off my camera so that way you guys are the focus of the conversation. And I will just reminder to everybody, I will be in chat if you need me.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me, Karen. Let me say a few things about myself. I'm beyond middle age at this point. I'm white, and I've been doing this kind of advocacy work for probably close to 50 years now. A little bit about myself. In my 20s, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia and I was hospitalized for 7 months. When I got out, I spent a lot of time trying to recover, trying to build a life for myself, and then was hospitalized again 3 years later for 7 months and told that I was a chronic schizophrenic, and you might as well think that your life is going to be one of being in and out of the hospitals. Well, that turned out to be not exactly true. I lived the next 40 years with no therapy, no drugs, and never being hospitalized again. And during that time, I went back to school and I received my PhD and became a licensed psychologist. And I've been advocating for compassion, freedom, and a better system of care for people who've had struggles in their lives and were told something similar to me. Well, I've been doing this work mostly with people who have been considered mentally ill. And I've tried years ago to kind of integrate a cross-disability approach to people who are struggling. And the time wasn't right. I learned a good deal about the disability community and worked with some independent living centers in New York, trying to teach that people who were considered to have a psychiatric disability had many of the same needs and as people from other disabilities. Well, I believe that about 3 years ago, when COVID struck this country, was the first time that there was a real opportunity to work with people in the disability movement in a collaborative way, because we shared the mission of bringing people out of institutions into community. That most people, regardless of their disability, with proper supports, could live within the community. And at that time, I started doing some work with Roads to Freedom and also with the National Council on Disability on the subcommittee for mental health. And that's when I learned about guardianship. I didn't know very much about it. I just knew that the treatments of people in psychiatric institutions was abominable. But I found out, much to my dismay, it's a very similar situation with people who are subjected to guardianship. And I don't know if it's more widespread than what happens to people who are assigned to psychiatric institutions, but there's a common theme there that people can do better not living in massive institutions. And at that time, I was working as executive director of Mind Freedom International. And we had a program called SHIELD. We still do. I'm no longer the executive director. But the SHIELD took complaints from all over the country and sometimes from different countries about people who were treated in ways that they shouldn't be treated. And we tried to mobilize support for them. We had 400 to 500 people signed up for SHIELD who would respond to an alert that a person was receiving electroshock, let's say, against their will, or being forced to take drugs that were harmful to them, sometimes in institutions and sometimes outside institutions. And what we did, we mobilized a campaign to people who were in charge, who would be embarrassed if it became public what they were doing. And we tried to get whatever treatment was harming people and against their will, we tried to make a change in that. And that's how I met Karen and people from Roads to Freedom. And there was an issue with a man named David, who was, Karen, I think you were the first one who was working with him. And I remember you saying you regret that you thought it would be a simple process of moving this person back into community. He had his own home, he had a car, and he seemed to be able to take care of himself. Well, anyway, to shorten the story a bit, he had a problem with his wife. He had surgery and she was abusing him, and he was put in a care facility just to get away from her while he was recovering. Correct me if I mischaracterize any of these things, Karen, because you're much more familiar with it than I am.
Well, if you'd like me to share a little on it, Ron, you said something a little bit ago that yes, I very much do regret ever having told David. Yeah, like Ron said, David was a victim. Here was the first problem. Okay, David is a victim of domestic abuse. He is being abused by his wife. So instead of removing his wife from the home that they own together, because she is the one that is abusing David, David is told, hey, you need to have a guardian. We are doing this for your protection, Dave. We're going to keep you safe from your wife. And in order to keep David safe, David was told that he would need to relocate 2 hours from his home in Huntington County. So here is this older gentleman who, prior to having this surgery, had a same-day procedure on his neck. He explains to us that he came to after the procedure. He was handed a phone, and the voice on the other end of the phone was a staff person from the Huntington Area Agency on Aging here in Pennsylvania, explaining that, we're your guardian now, and you're going to be going to a new facility. And good luck. That was kind of it. So David arrives in Lycoming County in fall of 2019, and after 2 months in this facility, November, things are starting to get pretty scary because, as Ron had mentioned earlier, we're starting to see the pandemic impacting the United States. So David is in a facility where he is forced to share a room with 3 other individuals. He starts talking to some people at this facility, and he hears about the Roads to Freedom Center for Independent Living. And we were actively working with some of David's peers at this facility to transition them. So they say, Dave, call Roads to Freedom. And of course, David calls us. And yeah, like Ron said, geez, Dave, I don't see any issues here. I explained to him that a lot of transitions take a long time because we would need to obtain housing for that person. They need to have a place to live. In David's situation, he already had a house, so it was going to be relatively easy, or so I believe, to transition Dave back in the community. When Dave arrived in Lycoming County, he had a guardian that was very receptive to David's wants and David's needs. I'm never a fan of guardianship, Ron, but this particular guardian did recognize that David had some rights. And we reached out to this guardian and we said, hey, we got this call from Dave. Dave says you're his guardian. But here's the problem. Every time we try to call Dave at the facility, we're told you can't talk to Dave. We're told we have to speak to administration. We're told the administrator's in a meeting, and it's just barrier after barrier are being put up. We get his guardian and we explain who we are and that we would like to assist David to enroll in the Home and Community Waiver in Pennsylvania, where Dave, if he needs services, could receive them in his own community. It saves lives, it treats people with dignity, and it saves tax dollars. But like I said, during a pandemic, when 70% of the deaths in Pennsylvania were in congregate facilities, David felt every day that he was going to die in this facility. That, COVID, he would die. He had no rights. He couldn't leave the room. He was stuck in a room with other people that at times were COVID positive. We reached out to David, and his guardian said, you know what? I like this idea. And I don't think Dave's properly placed there either. In fact, the guardian was so concerned that David may be placed incorrectly that the guardian reached out to the judge in Huntington County, Judge George Zanuck, and said to Mr. Zanuck, I'm petitioning the court. We would like to have a review of David's status. And the guardian was so convinced that David wasn't incompetent that the guardian, Mr. Millay, had also ordered a separate independent assessment of David's abilities. And lo and behold, Dr. Tulak completed this assessment, and his assessment reflected that David was not incompetent. And that's when it really kind of started going down the tubes. Dave went to Huntington County in the fall of 2020. He went before the judge. The judge said, boy, there's just too much information. He couldn't make a decision at that time. Now, meanwhile, David's rights. David wanted to know what was going to be used in court for the evidence that was going to support that he was incompetent. David reached out to the social worker at the facility where he was being warehoused and said, I'd like to have my medical records. He was told, kind of cursory. Look, basically, you really don't need them. You're incompetent. Your attorney has access to them, but don't worry about it. You don't need these records. David reached out to our agency and said, look, I just want my medical records. I think I have that right. We assured Dave that he did. We connected David with an organization in Pennsylvania called Disability Rights PA. Every state has this protection and advocacy element. We reached out to them and they said, yes, Dave, that's right. You have access to those records. I'll make it quick. What happened was Dave got those records about 3 weeks after The judge ruled that David was still incompetent and that David needed to have a guardian. And the judge never saw the report that had been generated by the second party that indicated that David was not incompetent. So at this point, the guardianship changes. It now becomes the Area Agency on Aging in Huntington County. They are now David's guardian. They are David's representative payee. They determine what services he receives. They determine where he lives. And here's the kicker, Ron. Let's talk conflict of interest. If David files a grievance for how he is being treated, how he is being cared for, guess who's going to be the investigating entity? The Agency Area on Aging. There is an incredible conflict of interest here, that the same agency that is making all of your choices is also the same group who gets to determine if your rights have been violated. Ron, if you can help me understand how that could work, wow, that would be great. So that's one of the problems that we're seeing in Pennsylvania. Something else that 9 other states in the United States of America recognize is something called supportive decision-making. Supportive decision-making is essentially a tool in a toolbox that can assist a person, whether that person has an intellectual disability, a developmental disability, this person has developed a neurological disability, whatever it may be, where a person can maintain their identity. They don't have to be declared incompetent. They don't have to have all of their rights removed from them. And they are still able to participate in decision-making. And that is something that, we really feel needs to occur across the United States. The entire country needs to embrace looking at less invasive ways to manipulate people. I mean, people are assigned a guardian and that's it. Getting a guardianship in place can be done very quickly and rather easily. Removing a guardianship is an absolute nightmare, as so many people can testify and tell you. Ron, I'm going to hand it over to you now. I'm getting a little escalated.
I want some of your coffee. First, there are actually 14 states right now that do supported decision-making. Illinois just passed it. Supported decision-making is a good thing. It's a step up in the right direction, but it's not the answer to the corruption and the mistreatment of people that happens in guardianship. I have spoken to a number of people now, and I've learned things that just really makes my heart break. In terms of, let's take an example of a Down syndrome child is born to parents. From that time of birth, I've been told, they've been in a pipeline to put that person in guardianship when they turn 18. And they just don't get the information of what that means. Another aspect of this that I've learned is that a family petitions for guardianship for, various reasons. And what happens is they might be the guardians for 3 or 4 months, and then they're told that they're not really meeting the requirements of guardianship, and it's taken away from them and it's put in the hands of a lawyer. And this attorney might have as many as 30 people under guardianship, and they get paid for that. And it's kind of, I don't know if I should say what I feel about lawyers that do this, but, people, just heard one of the people who works with us say that these are second and third rate attorneys that have found a niche for themselves. And we've been working really hard to free David from his confinement in a nursing home where he doesn't belong. And being a psychologist, I looked at the test results that another psychologist did in evaluating his competency. There's nothing. The only thing that has come up by that evaluation by a psychiatrist, is that he may be easily influenced. And my God, to put somebody into a guardianship because, they might be a little bit more trusting than the person who's always on alert. So there's just a myriad of reasons why people get placed in guardianship. And it doesn't have to be that you have a lot of money. And the scandalous behavior of lawyers and other people who have been guardians in just draining the funds. But you don't have to have $1 million in your estate to benefit people who are making a living out of this. The amount of Medicaid funding, I believe it's Medicaid funding usually, that goes into a person's confinement in a nursing home is outrageous. So this is what I've come to see is something that is just so corrupt and so set against people's best interests that I'm devoting my work now to trying to not only reform the guardianship system, but at some point changing it. And it's a dark, deep hole because it's not regulated by the federal government. The federal government provides funds and they have requirements that have to be met, but there's no hammer. There's no way of bringing the consequences on a federal level. It's state level. So what we're doing, as me as a volunteer with Roads to Freedom, is trying to create a public outroar. So some of the things that have happened with David that Karen had not mentioned because there's so much. I've spoken with his brother 2 times. They've been out of touch for a long time. His brother had sent a Christmas card to the residence where David was staying, his nursing home, and he received back the card saying he's deceased. One thing. The telephone being taken away from him that Roads to Freedom had given him, not knowing where he is, hiding him. The most outrageous thing, we've had lawyers, public interest lawyers, working to do something in this situation with David. And David is just kind of one example. There are probably much more egregious and terrible things that have happened to people. But lawyers have written 2 amicus briefs to restate what has happened, to see if there can be an appeal. But to me, the most outrageous aspect of this is the ombudsperson who works for AAA wrote a long letter to Roads to Freedom saying that we must cease and desist from taking any action with working with David. There's been so many machinations about this. They've hid him so we couldn't contact him.
How about when staff or advocates run? How about when people have gone and tried to visit David? David was taken out of Lycoming County. He was put back in Huntington County. We found out where he was. It was at this, it's a lovely former barn called the Shirley Home. Staff did get in briefly to see David. And once the Guardian was aware that advocates knew where David was, here's how it is. You walk into the facility and there's a sign there that says, you have to check in at the desk. You play by their rules to visit. So an advocate went to see David and said, "Hi, I'm Judy. I'd like to see David." "Well, you can't see David." "Well, why not?" And she was told, "Well, you have to call 24 hours in advance. You can't just walk in." So, okay. While she was there, she says, "Can this be my 24-hour advance notice? Because I'd like to come see Dave tomorrow." Absolutely. She arrives there tomorrow, that next day, after having given a 24-hour advance, and is told, "No, David is not allowed to have any visitors today." And Ron, you mentioning the telephone thing during this pandemic, here's Dave again, forced in a facility, sharing a room with 3 other individuals, sharing a telephone with 3 individuals during the pandemic. So Roads to Freedom serves as an assistive technology resource center through Temple University out of Philadelphia. And there were federal mandates to get assistive technology, get phones, get tablets, get devices in the hands of these people that are forced into these facilities that aren't allowed to have any visitation during the pandemic. And on 2 occasions, David's phone was stolen from him. The first time it was given to David, and the staff at Roads to Freedom it was sent as a Christmas package, and Dave got his package. And when Dave opened up the package, the staff had put in directions, what to do, press this button, do that, got the phone turned on. I'm in an office across the hall, and I hear my coworker Jay and David talking on the phone. And now Jay's explaining to him how to send a text message. So Dave is catching up to speed very quickly with technology. And what happened that day was a social worker came into Dave's room, and Dave asked if she could help with closing some of the windows on the phone. And when the woman took the phone from David's hand, she saw a sticker on it that it had come from our facility. And she immediately asked Dave, "How did you get this?" And Dave gave her the empty box. She said, "Did they give you anything else?" Dave described they did a cursory look through his room, rummaged through the box, took the charger, took everything that came with the phone, and took it down to the administrator. Everything that Ron and I are talking about is very well documented. We have, like Ron said, we have the letter from the state department from the area agency, from the state office of aging, telling us, like Ron said, stand down, deceased. You cannot have contact with this man. Yet at the same time, Roads to Freedom is federally funded to assist people to transition out of long-term care facilities. So we are obligated to provide this service to David. Centers for Independent Living, they were born out of the disability movement. They were born out of advocacy. And the role for any center for independent living is to advocate for people and to assure that they have access to the services and supports that they need to be a success in the community. David has not been given that opportunity. David has a guardian who, when David asked his guardian and his court-appointed attorney, he said, "Hey, we've got this hearing coming up. There were some different things that were going to occur via Zoom." David asked to have a staff person present. He just wanted an advocate present. His attorney told us, yeah, that can happen, but it never did. His attorney later said, well, that would be, a conflict of interest to have somebody else involved in this. Meanwhile, Dave was really upset because he wanted to be able to read a letter that he had written to Judge Zanuck and explain to Judge Zanuck the impact that this guardianship had on his life. But David wasn't tech savvy, didn't know how to operate Zoom, so he never had that opportunity to share that message. So, the last time we had contact with Dave was in February when he was found at the Shirley home. And David indicated, in fact, he gave verbal permission for staff to record a phone conversation or a verbal conversation with him, where Dave says, yeah, he still wants help to get out of this facility. There was legislation passed by the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg that talks about Olmstead. And Tommy Olmstead was a gentleman who worked for the Department of Human Services in the state of Georgia. And this legislation boils down to Mr. Olmstead felt it was okay to continually warehouse people in restrictive environments, not to allow them the opportunity to go to a lesser restrictive environment. So it was ruled that is a violation of the ADA. You cannot force a person into a restrictive setting if this person is capable of living in a less restrictive setting. And Ron, we were talking a little bit ago about supportive decision making. There's some very simple tools out there, things such as power of attorney, where maybe I don't make really good choices all the time, but it's mostly my finances. That's where I have difficulty. So perhaps we appoint a power of attorney for finances. I decide who I want to help manage my finances. Maybe I don't know somebody that's appropriate for that, so I assign a representative payee. Or maybe I'm really good at making a lot of decisions, but I'm not sure about medical decisions. Doctors can be kind of confusing. So much like probably most of us do, if I go to the mechanic and the mechanic says your car needs X, Y, and Z, I'm going to consult with somebody who knows about X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to ask for them to help me make a decision. It is the very same thing. Identify a person to help with decision making, because once guardianship is the slipperiest slope there ever is. Once you have started that careen down that hill, and Ron, you mentioned earlier about, kids that are born with intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities are, they got a target on them essentially from the time they're born, that this child is automatically going to be funneled into guardianship. That does not need to happen. I've worked with a young man, he's 32 years old now, he has cerebral palsy. For 30 years of his life, he never needed a guardian. He wanted to hunt in Pennsylvania. He passed the Pennsylvania hunter safety course. The Commonwealth feels he knows how to appropriately use a gun. He votes. He participates in every decision making of his life. But what happened was mom and dad decided to divorce, and it became a power struggle for mom and dad to make this young man's choices. So like I said, here's a guy for 30 years, there was never an issue. He never self-neglected. He never ended up, he made good decisions. And he ends up now, because mom and dad are getting divorced, having a guardian. So I asked his parents, I said, so now what happens? When you folks are deceased, and here is this young man who has what many people consider a cognitive disability, he's screwed. He's essentially SOL, because the ability to reverse that guardianship once it has been put in place is almost impossible. I work with a woman named Jody. Jody has a child with a disability. When Jody's child turned 15 years old, what we talk about as transition age, when you start looking at how this child is going to transition from school, what are they going to do after school? Are they going to look at secondary education? Are they going to look, maybe they're going to enlist with one of the armed forces. Maybe they're going to go directly into the workforce. But when this transition age happens and we start talking about the future, this mom was told, well, you're going to get guardianship, right? I mean, she was actually, Ron, she was made to feel like she would be a bad mother if she didn't go and pursue guardianship of her child. And I see this as a threefold issue. Number one, educating the individual with a disability, making sure that they understand and know what their rights are. Family members, making sure that families are receiving accurate information. When your school, when your physician are telling you that you need to pursue guardianship, for a lot of folks, they're the experts. That's who you go to for that advice. And then the third element of education needs to be within the legal system. There are judges that don't blink an eye. There are judges that will whisk people through that process. Ron, I think you used the expression earlier about a pipeline, essentially. There are counties in Pennsylvania that are very notorious for that direct pipeline. So there's so much education that needs to be done. Every state has a protection and advocacy group. In a perfect world, we would see those protection and advocacy groups having adequate staffing to assist people with guardianship removal. So many times these organizations aren't willing to help unless it's a class action or a systemic issue. But every one of these guardianship cases has developed into a huge systemic issue. Your thoughts, Ron? I'm rambling again.
No, you have your finger on the pulse of it. And I think there's several things that I would bring up. One, I think it's essentially education. I think people just don't know. Unless a family member has been involved or they themselves had to struggle with it. Just in terms of what we've been trying to do with David, we meet every Friday, and we're broken down now into committees to take action. And Karen, you can talk more about the different committees that we have than I can. but I'll give you a break to take a breath. We tried, I tried personally to contact various reporters from the newspapers and the media. We've had a little tiny bit of success in letting some of the investigative reporters know how big an issue this is, but they've really not picked up on it. And I think it's because of not having the opportunity to learn about these different things. So what we're trying to do is create a massive response from people to know what this is. And, it's almost like people who are under guardianship don't have feelings. They don't enjoy the kinds of benefits of having the freedom to make choices. I like to say that if they want to eat sugar puff cereals instead of Cheerios, that's fine. I mean, we all make these kinds of choices, which brings me to an issue, a statement that I've liked for many years. Psychiatrist Ed Potoval, who was a practitioner of Zen Buddhism, wrote a book called Recovering Sanity. And he also started an organization called Windhorse that worked with people who were just not fitting in any place with psychosis or alternate states or emotional problems. And he called the term islands of clarity. And I so resonated with that because I've been working for a long time with people who've been in and out of state hospitals. And I personally never spoke with somebody who didn't have some degree of clarity. They could have 10, 20 different personalities. They can have all sorts of things, but they did have, if you listened and worked with them, they had islands of clarity. They had choices that they could make. They didn't have to be confined. In this area also is this idea that we can assess people and say they're incompetent, they're incapable in a generic way. I mean, most anybody could be brought to the bad choices, as Karen said. Unfortunately, it can be kind of scary that you can be assessed incapable of making decisions for yourself, being in a guardianship, or locked away in a mental hospital. I am licensed as a psychologist. I could do an assessment. I understand the assessments, but I also understand the fallacy of seeing a person for an hour or less and deciding that they're completely incompetent and they need to be assigned to a nursing home or some facility because they can't take care of their basic needs. So this is a big, big, big battle. I also remember I was touched by somebody said on the committee that they took a vacation and they went to visit their elderly parents in, I forget which state, Midwestern state, and said that his parents believed that they would end up in a nursing home at some point because that's what happens to people when they get older. You get old enough, you just go into a nursing home. Big business. And unfortunately, our congressional representatives in statewide and also our federal representatives don't understand these issues. There was just recently a push to have more and better nursing homes. Nursing homes have become a stock market, a favorite for investment. It's, I don't know. it's a terrible situation, but we can't give up on it. And we're not going to give up on getting David out of that nursing jail. And I think we need as many people as possible to become aware of it, to write letters, because this is how things happen. If there's a big enough population group, some congressperson, some state representative will listen to you, because it's obviously wrong. And it's not that people don't have compassion. I wish they had more compassion, but part of it is not knowing. You just don't know about it. And the Britney Spears episode with the nurse, with her guardianship, conservatorship, it's called in California, has opened up some interest, but it just can't be about celebrities.
No, definitely, Ron. Like you say, it's not just limited to, people that have material stuff and big fat bank accounts. And one of the things you said earlier, Ron, about potentially fraud in Medicaid systems. One of the things that folks may not realize, for each county in Pennsylvania, okay, let's say like Homing County, there's this many people that are in this nursing facility. There are match funds from the federal government for every dollar, excuse me, for every Medicaid dollar that is used to warehouse somebody in these facilities. I will not call them a nursing home because there is nothing home-like about them. But for every dollar to warehouse somebody, there is $2 back from the federal government. So it not only tends to benefit attorneys, it benefits entities, it benefits obviously the facility, because folks living in these facilities, I'll use the example, you're living at Embassy Care here in Montoursville, Pennsylvania. Medicaid is paying 24/7 for your care. Of that 24 hours, we know to be factual at best, the nursing home industry acknowledges 2.7 hours of actual contact with a paid person is what you're receiving. And of those 2.7 hours, most of that is not with a skilled person. It may be somebody from dietary that is bringing in your tray. It may be somebody who's in the volunteer program. Those are all people that you need to see, but the bottom line is you could receive those services in your home. You don't have to go to a nursing home to receive those services. We have transitioned folks from nursing homes to the community where Medicaid was paying $7,000 to $10,000 a month for that person to be in a facility where they were not safe, where they were not happy, and where they did not thrive. We transitioned folks to the community, and those same people are maybe using 5, 6, 7 hours of service per day. So you're saving tax dollars, and more importantly, you're saving lives. David, one of the things, the last time we had contact with David was February of 2021. In November of 2020, like I said, David had gone back to before the judge. Judge Zanuck decided that, okay, we'll appoint a new guardian, and the Area Agency on Aging became that guardian. And like I said, that was the end of any contact whatsoever with David. The fact that they feel it is acceptable to deny him the rights to communicate with someone at the Shirley home, if David wanted to make a phone call, he had no privacy to do it. There were staff seated there the entire time. Ron, you mentioned about, the facility returning a card that was sent to David from his brother, returning it to his brother saying that he was deceased. I mean, if that doesn't show you what their intent is, you take an individual 2.5 hours from their home, from their social supports, from everything that they know. You put them in a facility far away, and you just hope like heck that this guy isn't going to make any squeaky wheels or get anybody's attention. And then when he does get somebody's attention and tries to exercise his right to participate in the community, to live in the community, to be a part of the community, he is then taken from the facility and put in an undisclosed location. I just don't see how people can look at this and not think there's something shady here, not think there's something fraudulent here. Like I say, it could happen to anybody. All it takes is, hey, boy, my neighbor, she's getting a little bit slower over there. I do have neighbors that are in their early 80s, and I've seen their independence lessen a little bit. But at the same time, I would not think of going to the Office of Aging and saying, boy, I don't know, those two people are making bad decisions. Tim doesn't mow the lawn anymore, and Ruthie the other day, I saw her outside walking around in just her nightshirt. I think that they're getting dementia. It just takes one receptive ear or somebody who has benefited from the business of guardianship to, okay, here we go. And you get that right judge, and you get that judge that says, yep, this person needs to have a guardian. And Ron, you yourself mentioned, a medical professional who has known you for all of 1 hour can be the person who's deciding your entire fate, not looking at the circle of supports that you have, not looking at what you can do for yourself. All the focus is on the negative. But like I say, the whole Olmstead violations, forcing people into a setting that is restrictive, that limits their choices, that limits their rights, it cannot be allowed to continue. You've got laws in place. How do you get somebody to hold them accountable? How do you get this law enforced? I guess that's where the big struggle is.
I think it is a question of having a hammer. The laws are there, but what do we do when the person, let's say an ombudsperson, is working for the place you're complaining about, and they turn around and complain because you're doing your job? It's it's something that makes me think, and I don't like to go back there, but during the Nazi extermination of people, they used to call them useless eaters. And it started with people with disabilities, with whatever it was. And also many of the psychiatric hospitals would have the people and just consider them, no benefit to society. And I don't like categorizing people, with the fascist kinds of things, but it's real. I mean, people of all ages are put in these restrictive facilities when there could be other things. I testified, I had 3 minutes to testify before the United Nations about a year ago, where they were doing a worldwide survey of institutions. They wanted to promote deinstitutionalization. And one of the things I thought of before I gave my 3 minutes was that I believe, and I was talking from the perspective of psychiatric disabilities, there were people during this session from the Caribbean, Canada, and the United States. They had it in regions. And there were people who represented autism spectrum kind of disorders. There was developmental disabilities. There was hearing, sensory. But I was talking about people with psychiatric disabilities. And I said, I don't have the statistics or numbers to prove this, but I believe that 90 to 95% of people are treated in the way that perhaps 5% needed to be, 5% who needed to be contained or medicated because they were a danger to them, an imminent danger to the community and themselves. And we just treat everybody, unfortunately, like they don't have value. And this is what happens with the guardianship that is appalling. And we need a big mass of people understanding this process and working against it.
Exactly. Hey, it must be getting close to the end of the hour because I see Ms. Landers is back with us.
I am. It is just about 2 minutes to 4 o'clock. This was a great conversation. There was lots of chatter going on in the comments. There was lots of good information that was put into the comments for folks to look back on. It's one of the reasons why I like doing these on social media, is because it's there and it's now there for good. It's also on our Disability Pride PA YouTube channel, which I find is is becoming a disability TV, like on demand. So, which I'm liking that vibe that we get. So I want to thank both of you for having this conversation with us. I think more people need to know about this issue. I think that we need to figure out what is broken. I mean, we understand the policy is broken, but what it is and what are the next steps to bring it to to bring it to the politicians, to those folks that unfortunately get to make that change or have to make that change, is like I would like to say. So any last words?
Well, I just appreciate having this opportunity to speak out to people, to hopefully get people interested and work on these issues. I think for me, it pretty much starts there, but I think one of the things we didn't mention was Roads to Freedom organized an ADAPT demonstration at the facility. We have now a petition. We have people from different CILs that will be walking around and with petitions to work on these policies. And it's the beginning of a long fight that we're in for. We've signed up for.
Definitely. Vicki, my only ask is this, that someday Ron and I come back and we have our friend David with us. And
Absolutely.
Dave tells his story.
Absolutely. I would love that.
Fabulous. I really like that.
I love that. And I would love to have you come back if there are updates or anything, any call to action that we can spread the word about on how to make these things happen even more.
Definitely.
So if if you both know how to get a hold of me now, so just reach out. Again, these are my chat and choose are a way to get information from the disability community about the disability community. There are important conversations. There's also fun conversations to be had, but we like to have them both, and we're not interested in politics to the point where we have to say no to certain conversations. So it's one of the things I enjoy about my job. So anytime we can support any other conversations, please let us know.
Yeah, Vicki, if I could just throw in just a quick clarity there. It was North Central PA ADAPT that had set up organized the demonstration. I just wanted to make sure that folks knew, because there's ADAPT chapters all over the place. Yeah. So with the North Central Pennsylvania ADAPT that did a protest outside of the Department of Aging, the Secretary for the Office of Aging, at his office in Harrisburg. And like Ron said, we've got to get people's attention, and we'll do whatever it is that we need to do to get that attention. And Ron, absolutely, thanks for spending more time with me. I know we spend a fair amount of time together each week. And Vicki, thank you so much for the opportunity again to get this out there to the streets. So
absolutely. Thank you so much.
Have a good afternoon, folks.
Oops. So everybody, thank you so much for coming out today for our monthly chat and chew. I hope you enjoyed the conversations that we had. Again, there's more information out there if you want to hear about it. You can reach out to us at disabilitypridepa.org, and we'll get you in touch with the folks that you need to that you want to talk to. You can also get in touch with the Roads to Freedom CIL, and that is CILNCP.org. All right, everybody, have a great month, and we'll see you back in September. We're going to be talking about voting and what are the last steps before the next election. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.